Welcome back to Untold Revenge Files. Today, the story you're about to hear takes place in Greystone, Virginia, just outside the corridors of power that most people only see on television. My name is Madison Calloway. I'm 41 years old, and 6 months ago, my own parents sold my home out from under me, a home that happened to be one of the most sensitive federal intelligence assets in the country. They just didn't know that. Let me take you back to where it started. Because stories like this don't begin with a single betrayal. They begin with 1,000 small cuts that you teach yourself to ignore. I grew up in a family where success wasn't just encouraged, it was weaponized. My father, Richard Calloway, built Calloway Capital Partners from a single office in Midtown Manhattan into one of the East Coast's most aggressive private equity firms. My mother, Judith, was his perfect counterpart, polished, calculating, and utterly obsessed with appearances. Together, they built a dynasty, and in that dynasty, there was a very clear hierarchy. My older sister, Vivian, was the golden child. She married Trent Ashford, whose family ran a commercial real estate empire. Together, they were everything my parents dreamed of: flashy, visible, impressive at dinner parties. Vivian drove a custom Porsche Cayenne. She vacationed in Positano. She posted curated family portraits that made the Calloway name look like American royalty. And then there was me, the quiet one, the middle daughter, the one who, according to my parents, chose a government job because she couldn't handle the real world. That's an actual quote, by the way. My father said it at Thanksgiving in 2019, right to my face, right in front of 14 people. What my family didn't understand, what I could never tell them, was that my little government job was something I'd spent nearly 2 decades building toward through security clearances, classified briefings, and operations that would never appear in any newspaper. I held a position that fewer than 30 people in the country fully understood. I was the Undersecretary of Intelligence and Analysis. My work touched every branch of national security infrastructure, and my home, a 4-bedroom estate on a quiet, tree-lined street in Arlington, was not just a home. It was a registered SCIF, a sensitive, compartmented information facility, hardened walls, signal-proof construction, biometric entry, monitored by federal security protocols around the clock. But to my parents, it was just Madison's overpriced house that she's never even at. They weren't entirely wrong about the last part. My work demanded constant travel, to embassies, to secure facilities, to briefings that I could never discuss. My absences were long and unexplained. I couldn't tell my family where I was. I couldn't tell them why. And so they filled the silence with their own story, that I was failing, that I was in over my head, that I needed saving. Before I tell you what they did next, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I'm genuinely curious to see how far this story travels. Drop it in the comments. Now, last Christmas. The Calloway family Christmas was always held at my parents' estate in Greenwich. 12,000 square feet of imported marble and inherited arrogance. When I arrived, Vivian was already holding court in the living room, dangling the keys to her new Range Rover like a trophy. Trent was beside her, laughing too loudly, his third scotch sweating in his hand. My mother barely looked up when I walked in. "Oh, Madison, you made it. We weren't sure you'd bother this year." I set my bag down, smiled. "Merry Christmas, Mom." Dinner was the usual performance. My father dominated the conversation, talking about his latest acquisition, a biotech firm he'd gutted and flipped for a $40 million profit. Vivian bragged about their new vacation property in Aspen. My mother made cutting remarks about my drab coat and the fact that I hadn't found someone yet. I sat quietly. I always sat quietly. Then, between the main course and dessert, my father clinked his glass. "I have an announcement," Richard said, his chest puffed, his eyes gleaming with that particular brand of pride that always preceded something cruel. "Your mother and I have done something that, frankly, we should have done years ago." He paused for effect. We've sold Madison's Arlington property. The table went silent. I felt my fork freeze halfway to my plate. Excuse me, I said. The house, Madison. That ridiculous money pit you're never at. We used the limited power of attorney you signed back in 2018. Remember when you were traveling and needed us to handle your property taxes? Well, we found a buyer, a private investment group. $5.2 million. My mother jumped in, her voice bright and rehearsed. And after our management fee, for handling the sale, the paperwork, the staging, we netted you 3.9. You're welcome. A $1.3 million management fee for selling a house I never asked them to sell. My chest went cold. My fingertips tingled. The room seemed to tilt sideways. I looked around the table. Vivian was smirking. Trent was studying his wine glass. My mother was beaming as if she'd just rescued me from myself. And my father. My father looked at me the way he always looked at me, like I was a balance sheet that never quite added up. You should be thanking us, he said. I set my fork down. My hands were trembling beneath the table, not from weakness, from the catastrophic realization of what they had just done. They had sold a classified federal installation to a private buyer. They had transferred a SCIF, a facility protected under executive security directives, to a group whose identity I didn't yet know. And they had done it cheerfully, arrogantly, without a single question about what that property actually was. I had no idea that what happened in the next 72 hours would shatter everything my family believed about power, money, and me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest bedroom of my parents' Greenwich estate, staring at the ceiling, my phone locked and dark on the nightstand. I couldn't make a call from this house. I couldn't send a secure message. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to act, but protocol demanded silence. So I lay there, my pulse steady, but my mind racing through every possible implication of what my parents had done. A SCIF doesn't just have expensive walls. It has reinforced infrastructure designed to prevent electronic surveillance. It has vaulted communication lines. It holds, or had held, classified materials, encrypted drives, and hardware linked to intelligence networks that spanned 14 allied nations. And my parents had handed the keys to a private investment group. Who were the buyers? That was the question that kept my jaw clenched until dawn. The next morning, Christmas Day, my family acted as though nothing extraordinary had happened. My mother was in the kitchen supervising the caterers. Vivienne was on FaceTime with a friend, laughing about some gala. My father was in his study, probably reviewing wire confirmations from the sale. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself coffee. My mother glanced at me. You look tired, Madison. You really should take better care of yourself. Maybe now that the house is off your plate, you'll finally have time to focus on your life. I took a slow sip. Mom, who was the buyer? What? The investment group. Who are they? She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, I don't know the details. Your father handled it. Some international firm. They paid above asking. That's what matters. International firm. My stomach dropped. Not a lurch, a plummet. The kind of sensation you feel when an elevator cable snaps in a dream. International. That single word transformed the situation from a serious federal violation into a potential national security catastrophe. I set down my coffee cup carefully, precisely, the way you handle something when your hands want to shake, but you refuse to let them. I need to leave, I said. On Christmas? My mother's voice was sharp, offended. Madison, honestly, you always do this. You always find a reason to. I have work. Work, of course. Your mysterious little job that's so important you can't even tell your own family what you do. She shook her head, her pearl earrings catching the light. You know, Vivian never. I'll call you Mom. I was in my car 12 minutes later. 45 minutes after that, I was inside a secure facility in Northern Virginia, sitting across from my chief of staff, Daniel Okafor. Daniel was one of 4 people on the planet who knew both my family situation and the full scope of my professional role. He was calm, precise, and utterly unflappable, which is why I needed him. "Tell me exactly what they told you," he said. I did, every word. The announcement at dinner, the power of attorney, the $5.2 million sale, the management fee, the international buyer. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. The POA they used, it was limited to tax filings and maintenance, not sale authority. I know. So the sale itself may be legally invalid, but the access, if the buyers have already entered the property, if they've had contractors inside, if they've even photographed the infrastructure. I know, Daniel. He looked at me for a long moment, not with pity, with the kind of clarity that cuts through panic. "Madison, what do you want to do?" I closed my eyes, and in that darkness, I saw 2 paths. One path was the daughter path, the one where I called my father, screamed, begged, threatened, and ultimately got dismissed as hysterical. The one where I played the role they'd written for me, the dramatic, unstable middle child who couldn't handle her own affairs. They would minimize. They would gaslight. They would tell me I was overreacting. The other path was the one I'd spent 20 years training for. "Activate the Protocol 7 review," I said. "Full breach assessment on the Arlington property. I want the buyer entity identified, traced, and analyzed by end of day. And I want the counterintelligence division looped in." Daniel nodded, no hesitation. Over the next 48 hours, I watched from behind reinforced glass as a team of analysts dismantled the transaction my parents had orchestrated. The buyer, Meridian Atlantic Holdings, was traced through 4 shell companies, 2 offshore registrations, and a Luxembourg trust. At the bottom of that chain was an entity linked to a foreign energy cartel with documented ties to an adversarial nation-state. My parents hadn't just sold my house. They had, through arrogance and greed, facilitated the potential transfer of a classified intelligence facility to a hostile foreign interest. I sat alone in my office that night, the city dark and silent beyond the blast-proof windows. I pressed my palms flat against my desk. I thought about my father's face at dinner, that smug paternal certainty. I thought about my mother's dismissal. I thought about every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering where I was the punchline. Have you ever realized that the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones who put you in the most danger? Not because they hated you, but because they never bothered to see you clearly enough to understand what they were destroying. I picked up the phone. I authorized the formal investigation. The next morning, I woke up, hollowed out, but steady. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to earn my family's respect. I wasn't performing. I wasn't shrinking. I was doing my job, and my job didn't care about Callaway family dynamics. My job cared about national security. I was done being the daughter they invented. It was time to be the woman they never saw coming. 3 days after Christmas, at 6:47 in the morning, 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans pulled up to the Callaway residence on East 71st Street in Manhattan. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. But Daniel briefed me within the hour, and later I would review the security footage from the agents' body cameras as part of the case file. 8 federal agents, 4 from the Counterintelligence Division, 2 from the Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit, 2 from my own department's Security Directorate. They arrived with warrants for documents, electronic devices, financial records, and any communications related to the sale of the Arlington property. My mother answered the door in her silk robe, her hair still pinned from sleep. She later told her attorney that she thought it was a mistake, that the agents had the wrong address. "Mrs. Callaway," the lead agent said, We're here pursuant to a federal investigation into the unauthorized transfer of a classified government asset. We have warrants to search this residence and seize relevant materials." My father appeared behind her in the hallway. I'm told his face went from confusion to indignation in approximately 2 seconds. "This is absurd. I'm Richard Calloway. I'm calling my attorney." "You're welcome to do that, sir. In the meantime, we'll need access to your study, your personal devices, and any documentation related to Meridian Atlantic Holdings." That was when the color drained from my father's face. Not because he recognized the name, but because he realized, perhaps for the first time, that the world did not operate according to his rules. The agents worked for 3 hours. They seized laptops, paper files, 3 phones, and a leather portfolio that contained the original sale documents. Including the limited power of attorney, my parents had stretched far beyond its legal scope. They froze the Callaway Capital operating accounts pending review. They froze my parents' personal brokerage accounts. They froze Vivian and Trent's joint account, which had received a $200,000 gift from my parents the week after the sale, funds that investigators now flagged as potentially derived from an illegal transaction. And then came the moment that, according to Daniel, broke the room open. One of the agents received a call. He stepped aside, listened, then returned, and addressed my father directly. "Mr. Calloway, I want to clarify something for the record. The property you sold was a registered federal SCIF under the authority of the Undersecretary of Intelligence and Analysis." My father stared. "The what?" "Your daughter, Madison Calloway. She holds the position of Undersecretary. The property was a secured federal intelligence installation. Its sale to an unauthorized entity, particularly one with foreign ties, constitutes a potential violation of federal statutes governing the protection of classified facilities and information." My mother sat down on the nearest chair. She didn't speak. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For perhaps the first time in his life, Richard Calloway had no rebuttal, no power play, no leverage. His daughter, the one he publicly dismissed as a failed mid-level consultant, was one of the highest-ranking intelligence officials in the federal government, and he had just committed a crime against her facility. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because this is the part of the story where you might expect me to feel triumphant, vindicated, powerful. And I want to tell you the truth. What I felt when Daniel told me about my father's face in that moment was grief, not satisfaction. Grief. Because the part of me that was still someone's daughter, the part that had spent 4 decades hoping that one day, just once, my parents would look at me and see someone worthy of pride, that part understood that this moment could never be undone. This wasn't a dinner argument. This wasn't a holiday slight. This was federal. This was permanent. And no amount of wishing could make my family into people who would have simply respected me enough to ask before selling my home. Weeks passed, then months. The investigation expanded. Meridian Atlantic Holdings was confirmed as a shell entity linked to a foreign energy cartel with intelligence gathering operations in 3 countries. The sale was voided. The Arlington property was recovered and resecured. A full counterintelligence sweep found no evidence of physical breach. The buyers hadn't yet taken possession, which was the single stroke of luck in the entire disaster. If you've ever watched someone's empire collapse not from a single blow, but from a slow, methodical unraveling, you know what the next 6 months looked like for my parents. Their attorney negotiated aggressively, but the facts were unforgiving. My parents pleaded to reduce charges: misuse of fiduciary authority, unauthorized transfer of a government-linked property, and failure to disclose material facts in a federal real estate transaction. They received 3 years of federal probation each. They were ordered to pay a $1.8 million penalty. Their passports were restricted. The Callaway Capital client list once a who's who of East Coast wealth, hemorrhaged names within weeks as news of the investigation leaked through legal and financial circles. Vivian called me once, 4 months in. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 11 seconds long. "Madison, this is insane. Call me back. You're destroying this family." I saved the voicemail, not as ammunition, as evidence, for myself, of how thoroughly they still misunderstood who had destroyed what. Have you ever been blamed for the consequences of someone else's choices simply because you stopped absorbing the damage? Simply because you finally let the weight fall where it was supposed to land? My parents' world contracted. The Greenwich estate went on the market to cover legal fees. Vivian and Trent, cut off from the Callaway financial pipeline, quietly listed their Aspen property. The family name, once synonymous with power and prestige, became a cautionary tale whispered in the private equity world. And I kept working, quietly, the way I always had. Knowing my parents were suffering should have felt like justice. Instead, it felt like watching a fire burn itself out. Necessary, inevitable, and profoundly sad. 8 months after that Christmas dinner, I was sitting in a secure conference room in Washington when I received a letter. Not an email, not a text. A handwritten letter on my mother's personal stationery. The cream-colored linen paper with the embossed monogram she'd used for decades. It was 3 pages long. I won't share every word, but I'll give you the shape of it. It began with an explanation, not an apology, but an explanation. She wrote about how they only wanted to help, how they believed I was overwhelmed and making poor financial decisions, how the sale was meant to simplify my life. She wrote about the humiliation of the investigation, the loss of friends, the sleepless nights. She wrote about my father's blood pressure medication being doubled. She wrote about Vivian's marriage, showing cracks. And then, at the bottom of the 3rd page, she wrote the sentence that stopped me cold. "We need to sit down as a family and fix this. Your father and I would like you to make a statement to the press clarifying that this was a family misunderstanding, not a criminal matter. It would help our case. It would help all of us." I read that sentence 3 times. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted reputation repair. They wanted me to use my position, the same position they'd mocked and dismissed for 20 years, to clean up the mess they'd made. They wanted the daughter they never respected to become the shield they desperately needed. I set the letter on my desk. I pressed my palms flat against the surface, the same gesture I'd made the night I authorized the investigation, and I sat with it. "Here's what I want you to understand, because this is the part of the story that matters most. I loved my parents. I still love my parents. Love is not a light switch. You can't flip it off because someone hurts you, no matter how badly. And there was a version of me, a younger version, a version still hungry for approval, who would have written that statement, who would have picked up the phone, smoothed it over, absorbed the damage one more time, and called it family loyalty. But I wasn't that version anymore. I wrote back. Not 3 pages. Not even 1 full page. I wrote 6 sentences. "Mom, I received your letter. I understand this has been difficult for the family, and I genuinely wish you and Dad health and peace as you navigate the legal process. However, I am not able to make any public statement regarding an ongoing federal matter, nor would it be appropriate for me to do so. The legal system will run its course, and I trust that your attorneys are representing you well. I hope in time we can find a way to relate to each other honestly. With love, Madison." I didn't hear back. 2 months later, I was offered a new appointment, ambassador to a G7 nation. I accepted. The confirmation process was rigorous but clean. My record spoke for itself. When I walked into the Senate hearing room, I saw the faces of people who knew my work, who understood the invisible weight I'd carried for years, and who addressed me not as Richard Calloway's quiet daughter, but as a diplomat, an intelligence professional, and a public servant. Nobody in that room asked me about my family. I moved overseas that spring. New city, new residence, new chapter. I decorated my apartment with things I chose, not inherited furniture, not gifts designed to remind me of my place in someone else's hierarchy. I hung a single photograph on my office wall, a picture of me at 23, the day I received my first security clearance, standing outside a government building with a paper coffee cup in my hand and a look on my face that I can only describe as quietly certain. That woman had known. Even then, she had known that her worth was not a number on a spreadsheet, not a property to be managed, not an asset to be liquidated by people who confused control with care. I think about my parents sometimes, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with a kind of tender distance, the way you think about a country you once lived in but can never return to. I grieve what we could have been. I accept what we were, and I protect what I've become. Richard and Judith Calloway still live in Manhattan, a smaller apartment now on the Upper East Side. Vivian and Trent are in counseling. The family fortune is diminished, but not gone. They'll survive. They have other resources, other connections, other children. I did not take everything from them. I just stopped letting them take everything from me. So after everything you've heard, if you were standing where I am now, with parents who asked you to sacrifice your integrity to restore their image, would you write that statement and call it forgiveness? Or would you write 6 honest sentences and call it self-respect? I know my answer now. It took me 41 years to find it, but I know it. Your worth is not a stagnant asset for others to trade. It is not a subscription they can cancel when it stops serving them. It is not a house they can sell while you're away, hoping you'll be too small to notice, too loyal to object, too quiet to fight back. Sovereignty of the soul is the only success that lasts, and sovereignty, real sovereignty, begins the moment you stop asking for permission to exist on your own terms. My name is Madison Calloway, and I am no longer for sale. And that's where Madison's story ends, not with revenge, not with anger, but with something far more powerful: silence. The silence of a woman who finally understood that she didn't need her family's approval to know her own worth. You know, it's funny. Her parents spent decades looking down on her. They called her job meaningless. They called her life a failure. They sold her house like it was a piece of furniture they didn't need anymore. And the whole time, she was protecting a nation that didn't even know her name. That's the thing about quiet people. They're not quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they know that some things don't need to be spoken. They need to be lived. So let me ask you one more time, if the people who raised you, the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, treated your life like a balance sheet they could edit whenever they wanted, would you keep letting them hold the pen, or would you finally write your own story? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because every single week we bring you stories just like this one. Stories about people who were underestimated, betrayed, and broken, and who came back stronger than anyone imagined. I'm telling you right now, the next story we have coming, it's going to leave you speechless. You don't want to miss it. Until then, take care of yourself, protect your peace, and remember, your worth is not an asset for anyone else to trade. See you in the next one.